Hi, I'm Stella O'Malley, a psychotherapist in Ireland.
And I'm Sasha Ayad, an adolescent therapist in the United States.
And this is Gender, a Wider Lens, a podcast dedicated to the shifting concepts around gender in our contemporary culture.
Through in-depth interviews, personal stories, and psychological exploration, we seek to open up the discourse around this hot-button issue.
Join us as we look at gender from a wider lens.
Howdy, Stella.
How are you, Sasha?
I'm well. We are here. Our technology's working and we're ready for our show.
The witch in me usually thwarts technology pretty much fairly regularly, let's face it. We live and learn.
Yeah. We talked to a really interesting guest, Lynn Chadwick, today. And man, if you want to think about an unexpected twist and turn in somebody's life, Lynn is an embodiment of this.
Yeah, Lynn is an amazing woman. I really admire her. I kind of got to know her first when she was working for Genspect, and maybe even before then. And she was just right in the center of the whole parent population, and she suffered like real extreme tragedy as a result of gender. I would say like really a really difficult life, and I watched her transform in the last few years from becoming, like many of us, I can include myself, obsessed with gender, eating, breathing, living gender, to moving way beyond gender and having a laugh, having a life. Like, it's kind of beautiful, but she still contributes in a very significant way to this cause. But she's managed to get a handle on it and have a life, having been obsessed. And I think we could all learn from that.
For sure. So for listeners who don't know about Lynn, I mean, she's the parent of two kids who trans-identified, and we got to hear a little bit about this story because they both became estranged from her. She lost basically her relationship with both of her adult children. She was married.
And a third child as well, who was an ally.
And a third child. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. She also got divorced. She found a new life, fell in love with a woman on a whale watching trip, and began a new life where she has traveled and seen the world with her new partner and is just living a completely different life than anything I propose she would have imagined. So this is what's, is so interesting and complex, that your life can change so dramatically. And of course, she's devastated by the loss of those relationships. And she practices radical acceptance. And she talks a little bit about that. So anybody listening who's kind of facing some sort of a complication in a relationship or a loss or something like that will really benefit from this conversation. And again, she kind of talks about how to get unobsessed with gender and put her energies and her intelligence and her passion towards a more productive way. And so that kind of leads us to the third big thing that we think is important about this episode, which is the Themis Fund. Lynn is the founding member of this. It's a nonprofit, independent, kind of nonpartisan group. And they serve to connect detransitioners in the U.S. with attorneys. And the Themis Fund funds those attorney and law services. Yeah.
Yeah. And everybody talks about the detransitioners as in that these lawsuits are going to be a game changer. So Lynn moved on from obsessing from gender and instead created something. And everything about how she turned her life around after terrible, terrible pain and sorrow is something I think anybody could learn from. It's a beautiful story.
Yeah, definitely. Before we dive into the conversation, we want to take a quick moment and thank our sponsors, Genspect and Therapy First. Genspect is an international organization committed to fostering a healthy approach to sex and gender. Genspect will be hosting the Bigger Picture Conference in Lisbon, Portugal this September. To learn more about who will be speaking at the conference and to order your tickets, visit genspect.org.
Therapy First is a non-profit worldwide professional association of mental health providers who view psychotherapy as the appropriate first-line treatment for gender dysphoria. Therapy First supports psychotherapists working with gender dysphoric youth and young adults and offers public education on mental health and psychotherapy. Visit therapyfirst.org to learn more. Now here's the conversation.
Hi, Stella, and welcome, Lynn Chadwick. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you for having me on.
Funny, Lynn, you're one of the first parents I got to know who was working very hard to kind of expose the issues around trans ideology.
Hmm.
I knew so many parents who were so distressed and who were kind of immobilized, and then you had been
Hmm.
in it for that bit longer, and you were kind of working. You were like saying, "What can we do?" Now, all these years later, you've an extraordinary story,
Oh,
and
thank you.
yeah, and I think it's an extraordinary story because there's been so many extraordinary changes. I think you could give us a
Hmm.
glimpse to the kind of the 180 that happened in your life. I don't know where you'd
Hmm.
like to start, but to me that is the first bit of extraordinary, and the second bit of extraordinary is the gorgeous swing that happened. So you had two big swings in your life that I know of. One was
Hmm.
devastating, and one was beautiful.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it just shows that there's plenty of life ahead of any of us.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So take us back. Where did this all start for you? You said, of course, your family was impacted. So tell us.
Yes. Yes. So, like all parents of ROGD kids, I did not choose the world of gender. This is probably not a topic that I would have dived into full force if it wasn't for the fact that two of my children became trans identified and medicalized and estranged from me. And like all parents that experience this, I was extremely devastated. I went through a long period of time where, to be honest, I didn't even want to be alive. I saw the entire world through gender glasses. It was like there was a filter in front of me, and the only thing that I could see was the emergency of gender, the devastation of it, and the fact that it wasn't just happening to me, but it was happening to people everywhere. And
Hmm.
that untold families and untold young people were being harmed, and I couldn't talk about anything else, and I couldn't think about anything else. I read every study, I watched every video, I organized actions, I started a Facebook group, and I did a lot of volunteer work. For about 4 years, I worked on gender every day, all day. I never took a day off. I never told anybody no. And I did a lot of volunteer work, and I completely burned myself out. And I had no life because gender takes over your life. When someone
Hmm.
comes and takes your children, I don't know how many mothers would be able to say, yeah, but I'll still go and, you know, you can't think about anything else. So that's kind of where I was. Um,
Can I ask, when your
yeah.
kids were starting to question their identities and kind of go down this road, were there moments where you vacillated back and forth between, like, maybe this is fine and I should just be supportive of it, or in my gut this doesn't feel right? Because a lot of families we meet, sometimes they're really on the fence about how to respond or what they think. What was that
Hmm.
process like for you?
Well, for me, like a lot of families, my children were too old for me to really have any control over it. They were both young adults. And so I think that that's a situation that a lot of people aren't aware of unless you're kind of part of this, is that it's some families are impacted when their kids are still young and they're still
Mm-hmm.
teens. And then you have the very hard job of parenting a teen through the midst of it. But other families are equally devastated when their young adult child turns to gender. And basically, you just watch the train wreck.
Yeah.
So you can either make a fuss about it and say, and really have a lot of fights about it, but there's not really that much you can do. And that was my situation. And so I didn't really have, there was no reason to argue that much because it was really clear there wasn't anything I could do.
Okay.
So,
I
Yeah.
think a lot of parents, if they have a second child who identifies as trans, they're astonished. They just think, well,
Hmm.
that particular hurricane isn't going to strike twice. And I think they feel undone by the second child. And I often
Hmm.
notice the second child sometimes is has more to prove, if you follow
Hmm.
me, and so is
Hmm.
arguably less likely to desist or
Hmm.
detransition because of
Yeah.
that. I don't know, but psychologically, I would say they do.
Yeah. And it's astonishing how many families have multiple children that are impacted. It's actually quite common.
It is. It
Yeah.
really
Hmm.
is. And
Yeah.
I've found that by the time the second child comes to this kind of identity crisis, the parent is just so exhausted from the first child that there's not a
Hmm.
lot left to give, which
Hmm.
is really challenging. So,
Hmm.
don't want to take away from your story. So, you have this thing happening with your adult children. You get
Hmm.
involved basically full time in gender. You're doing a ton of work around the clock. As you said, I said no to nobody, right?
Yeah.
And what kind of work were you doing at the time? What was the nature of that involvement?
Well, the first thing I did, I started a Facebook group for parents, and it's word of mouth, invitation only, and it has close to 500 parents in it now. And so I was talking with and kind of helping and just advocating for parents that were in pain. And I kind of had a background for that because I was a neonatal intensive care unit nurse.
Oh,
Yeah, before I got slapped into gender. And
okay.
I spent 28 years sitting next to grieving mothers who were planning to have a happy birth
Oh,
and decorating their nursery. And then they had a 2 pound premature baby who might die. And that's very devastating as well. And so I spent a lot of time with grieving parents. And I had no idea. I think that really prepared me for what I ended up doing later in this part of my life.
wow.
Yeah, yeah. So I did a lot of that. And then I don't know if you remember the Kelsey Coalition, but I
Mm-hmm.
was involved with the Kelsey Coalition, and I was kind of their parent representative, and I was the kind of the public person. And so I
Could you
did some
tell people?
speaking.
Could you tell
Yeah.
people about the Kelsey Coalition? It feels like a
The
throwback from
Oh, it
the
really
old
is a
days.
throwback. You know, it was one of the first
It was
parent-led
very exciting.
initiatives to try to affect some change, and there were a number of campaigns that were done, such as writing to doctors and petitioning people, and just gathering stories. We
Mm-hmm.
gathered a lot of stories, and they were awful stories. But the Kelsey Coalition kind of fell apart eventually. But
Can I ask you
yeah.
to comment on
Hmm.
something too? Because I think parents who
Sure.
are in this world now may not understand. It was so underground.
Yeah.
The
Hmm.
leader of Kelsey Coalition, I knew her well, but she could never use her name in public. It was totally
Hmm.
pseudonymous. Everything
Hmm.
was felt like an underground railroad of like support system for
It
parents.
did.
And
It
it's just so
did.
different now. I mean, of course,
It
there's still
did.
the secrecy, but talk a little bit about that because you were there in the
Yeah.
Oh,
early days.
yeah. We met like it was a big secret, right? And then I led the Seattle branch of parents of ROGD kids. And parents would come to meetings with pseudonyms at the parent meeting.
Yeah.
They wouldn't even tell each other their names. And I have to tell you, I still don't know the leader of the Kelsey Coalition. I don't even
Oh,
know her name. And I worked with her that whole time, and we never had like a volunteer meeting. We didn't know who else was volunteering. It was all really, really like this the dark web kind of thing or something. It was crazy how secret it was. But in 2019, I did an interview with Brendan Showalter for the Christian Post, and we talked about whether I would go anonymous. And I thought about it, and I thought, you know what? I already lost my kids. I don't have a job. I can't get fired. They can't take my kids away twice. I'm going to go for it. And
oh,
I told it in my own name, which I think probably didn't help my chances of reuniting with my kids ever again, because they're upset, and they probably always will be that I
Oh,
told the
were you?
story publicly.
Was there
Hmm.
some years in between you telling the story publicly and you, being estranged from them?
Um, well, it wasn't very long, because my daughter sent me a card in the mail, and said she didn't ever want to talk to me again. And that was the fall of 2018. And by the middle of 2019, I was just running with this thing. It was everything. And, maybe it was, you talk about the stages of grief, and now I kind of look at those years of really frantic activism, and I almost think it was a bargaining
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
thing. If I work hard enough, then,
Yeah.
maybe something good will happen if I just work on this, Um, but it was almost frantic. There was so much that happened, and I got drag queen story hour stopped in King County, Washington, which took an entire summer. It was incredibly crazy, and there was frantic activism. But I don't think that was good for me, really. Maybe I had to do it. Maybe it was a phase, but it sure didn't make my life a beautiful life, which is what I have now. I have a beautiful life. So,
And can I just point out,
yeah.
though, because I remember you telling me, like, that you had been completely left isolated when your kids trans-identified,
Hmm.
even to the point of the church rejected you, which always stuck in my mind as so bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I noticed that people just avoided me, and they didn't want to talk about it. And if they did, they would say, "Well, how do you think this happened?" And after a while, I realized they were saying, "What did you do?"
Mm.
Because this would never happen to them, right? And people were aware that I was doing activism, like the drag queen story hour library thing. And you would think that would be something that Christians would want to get involved in, not having drag
Yeah.
queens read to little toddlers. They didn't want to touch it. And then COVID happened, and everything shut down. And there was one day I was in the office of the church talking to three or four of the pastors. And I was sobbing, and I was telling them that I didn't want to live. I was so devastated. And they told me that I had an idolatry problem.
What do you think they meant by that? What were you idolizing?
I I don't it was like I cared about this cause more than I loved
Mm,
Jesus. And I
Oh,
can't imagine anyone telling a grieving mother whose children had died that they had an idolatry problem, and they were, you shouldn't be so sad. And it, it just no longer, I no longer wanted to be part of that. And I had prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed, and I started to nothing worked. And I thought, well, if God loves me, then I don't think he's doing a very good job of it. I mean,
mm.
I just kind of it just didn't work for me anymore. And I let go of all that, and I started to feel a lot better, because I wasn't trying to squeeze myself into anybody else's expectations anymore. So that was a good thing for me, to be free
Yeah.
of that. But really, it's a lot for people to listen to all the time. And
Hmm.
I know now it was hard to be with me, because all I could talk about was gender and how terrible
Hmm.
this was. And I had a good friend, and she had listened and listened. And one day she just started crying, and she said, "It's so hard to hear this."
oh,
Yeah.
And I felt so angry. I was like, "Well, it's really hard to live it too, you
Hmm.
know?" And but really, it's not her fault, But I think people have a hard time having the capacity to be as understanding. They don't understand. And really, the only people that really do understand, and parents say this all the time, is other parents.
Hmm.
Um, And so for parents, our community that we have with each other is really our healing ground. And we know, we understand.
Yeah. And
Another parent will get it.
yeah, and I can almost imagine, kind of in reference to something you said a moment ago about nobody would tell a grieving mother not to be sad. And I can
Mm-hmm.
imagine people saying, well, your children have not died. They've obviously
Mm-hmm.
done some very painful things
Mm-hmm.
and pulled away from you. But
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine people saying, well, I don't know if that's the same thing. So estrangement is
Mm,
such a complicated type of grief because
it
it's
is.
ambiguous and
Yes.
it's there are
Yeah.
people who are going to point fingers of blame to all different parties,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
talk just a little bit about the estrangement experience. And how did it
Mm.
come about? Like, I know you said your daughter sent you a letter. Like, could you
She
share a little
did.
bit more about that?
She did. So I was unaware that my daughter had medically transitioned or transitioned at all. And I found out by accident that she had legally changed her name and started testosterone.
She was your second
And
child to transition.
yes. And so I sent her an email and I said, I understand you have a new name and a new identity, and I want you to know that I'll always love you no matter what you do, and I'll always want you in my life. And that was it. And she had changed her phone number, and she'd been kind of stalling me for months. I hadn't seen her for about 3 months, which was not normal. And shortly thereafter, I got this letter in the mail, and it said, I need to have no contact with you.
Oh,
And so far, that was fall of 2018, and so far, not a word from any of them.
And she
So
had witnessed what happened with her older sibling. I mean, what was there
yeah,
active? I know they were adults. Was there active debates or conflict with the kids, or was it more just as they started to identify as trans, they just kind of voluntarily pulled away, which is something we do
yeah,
see a lot.
yeah. Well, my son had transitioned quite a long time before that, and he had moved back here close to me, and we were in frequent contact. I would come over and take them grocery shopping because our car broke down, and
Mm-hmm.
and I helped him get an apartment, and I would go over and we would play games and watch movies and walk the dog. So we were getting along really well.
Mm-hmm.
And then something happened when Donald Trump got elected. He sort of got a little
Mm-hmm.
panicky, you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then one day he just asked me if I was going to sign a bathroom bill petition. And I said, and I didn't want to talk
Wow.
with him about it. I just didn't see any point in even discussing it with him.
Yeah.
It's not helpful.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I think there's got to be a good solution where everybody's safe, because, I mean, you can't have people with penises in shower rooms with 8-year-old girls, I mean, there's got to be a better
Yeah.
solution. And then he just stopped talking to me and he said I was
Yeah.
a fascist, and that was the end
it's
of it.
It's
funny.
like an ideological litmus test, and I see
Yeah.
adult kids sometimes do this. They'll pose a question, and it's really a question that kind of gives them permission in their mind to justify the estrangement.
Hmm.
And they
Yes.
want to because
Yes.
the parental perspective in and of itself is a threat to the fantasy of trans.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that's very
Yes.
interesting.
I
We, we,
almost
we
think our love is a threat to
Yeah.
trans.
Yeah.
And I realized this eventually, and it was actually very comforting to me when I realized that I think the reason that my children can't be around me is because they know that I love them and they know that I'm right. And they can't stay on the path that they're on and look at my face, feel my love, even if I don't argue with them. I think that it makes it hard for them to continue on in that ideology that they're in. So I think it's helpful to parents to realize that they're not rejecting us, they're rejecting the truth. And so it's hard for them to do both.
I remember I knew quite a few addicts, years ago, and often they didn't want to see me when they were in kind of full flow addiction. And I always thought it was, well, I'd never say a word. They knew I'd never say a word, but they could see in my eyes something that I couldn't not show, if you follow me, which is the
Yeah.
truth of who they were, if you follow me. They could see themselves
Yeah.
through my eyes. And
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think children of parents can see, they know how the parent is reading them, and sometimes they can't face that. They don't want to
Yeah.
face that. But something you said
Yeah.
earlier reminded me. We had a guest on recently, Ariel Isaac Norman, and
Norman.
she spoke about how, she was really getting on very well, straddling kind of being quite questioning around gender, but also living among the, people who were medically transitioned. And she said kind of there was a collective change in the air when Trump got elected. It was like a lot of people, they were lit by, they were lit by a fear around anybody who wasn't fully on board. And she noticed a distinct change. And it's so interesting that you noticed the very same thing within your own family.
It was
A kind,
2016.
yeah.
Yeah. When
Wow.
Trump got elected, and I was born in Canada, so I have Canadian citizenship, and my son wanted me to help him run away to Canada. He was going to run away to Canada because Trump was going to come and get them.
Crazy.
And he never did run away to Canada. But it's that irrational fear, like no one's going to come, no one's coming to get you. It's okay. But I think, getting back to the parent and the estrangement, I think what it boils down to, I don't think that children want to feel like a disappointment to their parents.
Yes.
And I think they feel like they're a disappointment, that we're disappointed in them. When we're not, it's not that we're disappointed in them, we're terrified for their health and for their well-being. And there's a big difference between feeling like you're a disappointment and being concerned about your well-being. Those are two very different things.
Very. I've often thought we haven't said enough about, well, if I do have transphobia, maybe you should have some sympathy for my phobia, if you follow me. if that's if that's the case. But could we speak a little bit about, you were very evocative how you spoke about how you had the gender glasses on and you were just in the trenches. And I think a lot of parents and others, it's not just parents these days, who are just living and breathing. I'm in a few WhatsApp groups, and like it's so clearly on everybody's mind at all times, because like they're watching the news, they're watching a film, they're on the bus, and they're thinking about trans. And I'm sure everybody wants to know, what brought you out of it? How did you pull out of it? Did you make a decision?
What brought it out
did
of
you
me?
think, I better get out of this? Or what actually happened there?
Well, it just became more and more miserable, honestly. And I had a friend who came to stay with me for a few days, and she said, Lynn, I knew you did a lot, but I had no idea it was morning till night every day. And she said, you need to lighten up.
Yeah.
I think I met you around then. I think we had a Zoom and you told me. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And I was like, okay, but what would it be made of? Because I no longer had like any kind of a life. And the first time I went to a therapist, it was an absolute disaster. And she said, well, you need to practice self-care. And if you think you're going to commit suicide, you should go to the emergency room. That'll be $160. Basically, that's what it was. And I was like, oh, self-care, you want me to go to get a pedicure? I was so dismissive of it,
Yeah.
But my friend said, this is really not healthy for you. You really should, and she bought me a little notebook and she said, I want you to write down things you want to do that have nothing to do with, she was trying to help.
Oh, what a good friend, by the way. That's really
She was. And, so anyway, I got invited to go to Baja to pet baby whales.
I remember.
Yeah. This really nice woman, she asked me if I wanted to go pet baby whales. And I said, yeah, I think that
Why
sounds
did she
really
ask
good.
you? Was she a parent or was she gender
No,
oriented?
she was just going to go, and she thought that maybe other people would like to go, and she put out this kind of general invitation, and to lots of women. And I said, "Oh, I will go with you. I'd love to go pet whales." And I said, "I'm going to turn off my phone." I actually had to get people to sub for me for some of the things that I was doing. I think I was running the GenSpec Facebook page at the time. I had to get somebody to do that for me. And I said, "I'm turning off my phone, and I want you to slap me if I say the word gender. I'm not even going to think about gender." And I looked at my phone screen. I had 12 minutes of screen time on my phone,
Wow.
an average of 12 minutes. And I think that was all my camera. And so I really did. I turned off my phone. We went to Baja. We pet baby whales. And there was this talk one night after dinner at the place we were at. And they had a video of this female gray whale feeding at the bottom of the ocean. And she's a beautiful, beautiful animal. And she's just going along the bottom of the sea, just sweeping in everything that she needs and spitting out everything she does. And it's just beautiful footage. And I was just mesmerized. And I had been like touching whales. And I turned to her and I said, "I'm going to be the whale."
Oh.
I'm just gonna get what I need in life, you know? And what I needed a lot of nature is what I needed.
Yeah.
We went outside a lot, and then we fell in love, and we're together, and I'm very happy.
Wait, you and the whale or you and a human? Just want to check.
No. Sasha, you're so funny.
You walked into that, Lynn.
No. So this woman that took me to Mexico, we fell in love.
But
And so
hang on a
we're
second.
very happy.
That sounds extraordinary. So the woman
Yeah.
who said, "Does anybody want to come and pet whales?" Was she the woman who you fell in love with?
Yeah, I kind of liked her already when I said I'd go to Mexico.
How
Can we
she
back
said,
up?
Yeah, back up, totally.
We need to back up. Were you married to the father of your kids before this, or the gender thing often can either bring a couple together or totally dissolve a marriage. Probably some stuff
divorced.
in between.
I was divorced.
Tell us.
And I was divorced. And I had figured out about a year before that I was a lesbian, and that I had kind of just never figured it out. Compad is real. You know, there's a lot of societal expectations that are really hard to overlook. And sometimes it can take a long time to figure yourself out.
What did you say? Compad?
So, yeah.
What's compad?
It's oh gosh, oh gosh, now the words escape me.
We can Google it while we chat.
Yeah, it's the way that society kind of blinds us to our actual sexual orientation because heterosexuality is expected.
Yeah. So a year before you met this woman, you realized you were a lesbian. Not a year before you got divorced. You were long divorced.
No. Mm-mm.
Okay.
Yeah, it was about around the beginning of 2020. Yeah, that I started figuring it out. And it was a happy thing. I was really happy about it. Yeah.
When she said, "Oh, would anybody like to come and pet whales?" Was it a women's group or was it?
She was asking women. Yeah, she was asking women. And let's see, I think there were two of us that took her up on it. No, three. We had four of us went. Yeah.
But you kind of had your eye on her anyway.
Oh yeah.
Did she know about everything you had been through with your own kid? Okay.
Yes, she did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you fell in love on this trip. Did that take you by surprise, or
I think what took me by surprise is the way that my life was never the same again. It was like those gray lenses, that whole way of looking at everything through this tragedy, that was gone. And I no longer viewed my entire life as a tragedy. And I no longer viewed everything is, it was like, it's all lost. The children are gone. This was what my life was about. It's all over. I'll never recover from this pain. And I felt that I can recover from this pain. I can.
Yeah.
If I want to. First of all, you have to want to, you know.
I just see our producer added
Yeah.
compet. I'd never heard of it. Is compulsory
Yes.
heterosexuality,
Compulsory. Yes.
often
Oh, I
shortened to
see.
compet.
Yes.
Never heard of it in my life.
Oh,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. This is what you do. This is what you do. You fall in
Wow.
love with a man and you have a family and, you
And
know,
may
it's
I
a
ask, because
society.
I've seen quite a few women who like when the children have fled the nest or whatever has happened, that they become lesbian. I wonder, is it because they've had their kids, they're free to,
I don't
no?
know. I just know what
What is
happened
it?
to me. And it was
Yeah.
great. The day I figured it out, it was just like all of a sudden came to me one day. I was like, oh, oh, that's great.
Wait, did you see a woman and say, oh, I fancy her?
Oh, I had a friendship that went bad and I was devastated over this friendship, like inordinately devastated. And and
Aha.
and then all of a sudden I realized, oh, wait a minute,
I
that
was in
wasn't a
love with her.
friendship.
I'm in love with
Yeah,
her.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
that's just fine, you know, but it brought it to light for me.
I
That was
get
the
it.
moment. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So then
yeah.
I know you well enough to know more happened. And by the way, anybody who's interested, Lynn will be telling her story and more besides at our conference in Lisbon. I can't wait. So us three will all be in Lisbon actually now
Yeah.
I
I'm
think about it.
Yes.
excited. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So there's more to come in your
More to
extraordinary
come.
life because after
I think
that, so
so.
to keep going. So you fell in love.
I fell in love, and we've been traveling in a van extensively,
You kind of
and
sold up and kind of decided
yeah,
I'm going on the
Wow.
road.
So
yeah,
cool.
yeah. My life just was completely changed. So yeah, I went from being a conservative, sad Christian mom, grieving mom, to a really happy traveling lesbian in a van. So that is rather a sea change, isn't it?
I love it. I've watched this in real time and it's just like, wow, this is so
Well,
cool.
I mean, I had nothing else to lose,
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I guess you look around you and you figure out, well, what have I still got? And what can I do
And
with that,
then you did something extraordinarily generous and far
Mhm.
reaching as a way of almost saying, not necessarily goodbye to trans world, but like, there's my last gesture or something. Would that be right?
Well, I don't know. I will never not care about gender, and fighting the absolute horror that's happening to people. But I have learned to be a lot more selective about what I do and self-directed about what I do. And I've decided that I know what I'm good at and what I can do and what I can contribute. And I also decided that I wanted to form those things and decide what I would do. And also that I have office hours, and I don't think about this all the time anymore.
Good.
And I sometimes people will ask me things about current articles or
I know.
other, legislative things, and I'm like, I don't follow it all. I'm not
Yeah.
following it all. It takes too much time to follow it all, and I'm busy backpacking. I want to live a life. I don't want
I
to think
know.
about gender. I never watch videos. I especially never watch surgery videos. I don't look at pics. They give me nightmares. Why should I watch that? I don't need to know more about that.
Yeah.
I think that parents a lot of the time they're so focused and they watch everything, and I don't think that's healthy. I just realized one day I do not need to see one more surgery picture, not ever again. Um,
Yeah.
But
and
then you
and I,
decided to create Themis. Where did that come from?
yes. So um, at this point in time, there is no shortage of articles, substacks, studies, open letters, petitions,
Close letters.
organizations. We have the CAS review, we have WPATH files, And the powers that be in the United States, such as the Endocrine Society and the AAP, they're like, nee, we can't hear
I
you. We don't want to
know.
hear you. Nothing is happening. And, you know, parents with kids that are involved in this who are affirming their kids, they haven't heard of the CAPS report. They don't
I
even know,
know.
they don't know about the WPATH files. They've never read these studies. They are being lied to.
Yeah.
And no one is listening. The US media has an absolute block on us. And so it's become really clear to me that the only way forward, the only way that we're going to change what's happening in the United States is through lawsuits. And lawsuits are not going to happen without cooperative, concentrated, focused, and strong organization and help from everybody, not just attorneys, but everybody. We need everybody because this is war that we're fighting legally. And the people that are caught in it, I don't know if they even sometimes realize they're walking into a war, but they are. But if we're going to go to battle, we need a little better army because our enemy is formidable. So, you know, these hospital systems and doctors are not going to go down without a really big fight. And they have all the money they could possibly want and all the gifted, talented, best attorneys and all the support of the media. And, you know, you can go on and on like that. They've got expert witnesses on call. And what do we have? You know, we have the truth, first of all. We have the truth. So I don't think we should be afraid because we have the truth, but I think we're going to need to suit up a little bit. So I talked to some attorneys and I said, would it help if you had money? And they said, that would help a lot. I said, you know, I think I could help with that a little bit. And so I started a charity called Themis Resource Fund. And we are, first of all, we're actively searching out attorneys that want to take and are prepared to take these cases. And when I say prepared, I mean, we want to know that they have the chops for it, not just that, you know, you have a legal license and you think this is wrong, but you need to know what you're doing. So we want good attorneys because we believe that detransitioners deserve the best representation that there is. Because
So
this
is
is a
that what
difficult fight.
Themis is focused on primarily, is detransition lawsuits, or is it
Yes.
all kinds of lawsuits
No,
related to
just
gender?
no.
Like, okay.
I wish I could help everybody, but this is a very large ask already. And I believe that if you're going to get something done, you're going to have to pick what you're going to do,
Yeah.
and then you're going to have to stick with it.
Okay.
So I've had a lot of requests from parents, you know, can you help me with my legal fight against the school, or, you know, the things that are happening now are just outlandish with CPS and a lot of things. And there is a huge need. I hope somebody does it, but I can't do it all.
Sure.
So yeah, it's detransition litigation assistance is what we're doing. So we're
Okay.
finding lawyers, we're connecting detransition plaintiffs with lawyers. We're helping to educate lawyers a little bit about what's going on. Like a lot of them have never even met a detransitioner. They don't even know kind of what they're in for when they start working with this population. They need to be a little bit, sympathetic and understanding of where these people are, for one thing. Um, and and then we are granting funds for litigation. And there's many things that cost a lot of money, and I'm not talking about the attorney's hourly fee. So some of the things that we have granted money for are medical records review, expert witness papers and preparation, travel expenses for attorneys, things like that. That can add up. They can be very significant. Expert witnesses, in particular, will sometimes charge up to $1,000 an hour for their work. And there's a couple, and you know, there's reasons for that because not everyone can be an expert witness. And so it's, it's very, it's difficult, and they will prepare a report that's going to be used. And every single word of that report needs to be correct, because the defense attorneys will draw every little bit out of everything, every nuance out of that they think that can be turned around and used against you. They will use it. So it has to be very carefully and well prepared. And so you can't have just anybody do it. There's not that many people that can. And so another thing that we're trying to do is to find more people that can be qualified expert witnesses. So that's another thing that we're doing. So we're getting pretty busy.
Are these
Psychologists, doctors, those kind of people that have experience in this field and can do this work. They're hard to find. Yeah. And, you need to recognize, too, that when people do this work, they are risking, they're coming up against reputational risk. So if, you have to have, if you're a lawyer, you've got to have your firm behind you, right? And maybe your firm won't be behind you. Sometimes they feel it's a conflict of interest because they're representing other people, and or they just don't want to be known for this, because this is still something that people think is bigoted and wrong to even question in the U.S., which is really unfortunate. These people are harmed, and they deserve justice.
We hope you're enjoying this conversation as much as we are. We just wanted to take a quick moment and say thank you to all of our listeners. Your support helps us to keep the lights on and the mics hot.
We recently made the switch to Substack so we could build a more robust listener community. Visit widerlenspod.com and check out the different subscription tiers.
For those of you who are in need of parenting support and resources, we each have parent coaching membership groups. Plus, you can buy our book, When Kids Say They're Trans.
And if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe, and get involved in the lively discourse in the comments section.
Thank you so much. Now, back to the show.
Could you tell some of the cases that you have ongoing with Themis Resource Fund?
Oh,
and also, I want to give a shout out to Mitra. She's an amazing lawyer. She's been working. GenSpect is very much supporting the Themis Resource Fund. And Mitra she's an extraordinary brain, isn't she? Mitra Faruher.
Yes, yeah. I adore Mitra, and so
she's a lawyer, human rights lawyer.
So Shapeshifter is one of Mitra's cases that we have funded, and so Shape is a gay man, a very effeminate gay man, and he was basically transitioned out of homophobia. And he was.
Explain that for anyone who is maybe lost in labels there and language. What do you mean when you say he was transitioned out of homophobia?
Well, so he is a very effeminate gay man, and that was not acceptable to his family, to himself, to his community. There's a lot of shame there, and so. Homophobia is real. It still exists. People think it's gone, but it's not. And so for some people, transitioning is a way to no longer be gay. Mm-hmm. So if you transition and you're a woman, then you're not a gay man anymore, and you don't have to be ashamed of yourself. Yeah. And I think that's just so tragic.
It is.
I work with
was Shape
Detransitioners.
a child? Sorry, I just wanted to get the timeline. Yeah. Was Shape a child when?
I don't know exactly.
Okay.
I don't have that many specifics. But what I love about what Mitra is doing is that she is actually using a tactic where she is saying that Shape has been discriminated against for his sexual orientation, and she is suing for discrimination and also for fraud. So there are reasons why you need to be a little bit creative. One of the reasons that some of the defenses in the U.S. have to be a little bit creative is because of our statute of limitations that we have here. And so most of the data that's coming out, and you guys will know this, is that the average age before somebody reaches a state of disillusionment where they begin to realize that they were not helped by their medical transition is usually 5 to 8 years, something like that, or longer, right?
Yeah.
And so by the time an individual realizes that they were harmed, their time is already up to file suit.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult to bring these cases because you come right up against that statute of limitations immediately if you try to file a medical malpractice suit. So that is why, in my opinion, I think that the most important legislative action that we could possibly pursue in the U.S. would be an extension of the statute of limitations in all states for this type of care. And, if the doctors actually really believe that they're not doing anything wrong, then I don't know why that would bother them. They haven't done anything wrong, so why should they be afraid? Right?
Yeah, we hear so many stories of doctors or psychiatrists sitting down with a gender dysphoric patient and saying, well, after assessing you, I can say for certain that you are indeed trans and the only thing that you can do is transition. And if they are so certain about that, then technically wouldn't they expect the patient to be satisfied 1, 5, 10, 20 years after?
That's right.
So
that's right.
I think that's a good point, Lynn.
Yeah.
That's right. And, since they haven't done any long-term outcome studies, then of course everybody's fine, right? Because we don't have the information, so it must be fine. Right?
Exactly.
But that's not what's happening.
Right.
These people are coming back, many of them, and saying, I was really, really harmed. So I think that it's even, I know people have put a lot of effort into the legislation to limit gender affirming care for minors. And I think that's really important, but I think that lengthening the statute of limitations is really where it's at.
I agree.
Because there's just nothing. Yeah, go ahead.
There was one thing you said earlier. I just, for people maybe who don't live in America like myself, or certainly I didn't realize that there was so much basically conversion therapy for gay, lesbian and bisexual. And since I've been working with detransitioners and I've got a detransition support group I work with, and I realized, it's quite significant that it really does happen. I really underestimated that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because of where I live. I totally thought
I remember talking with you about this. I
remember.
I pointed out to Stella that there's like this whole ex-gay movement in the U.S. where these people claim that they have same-sex attraction, but they don't allow themselves to follow through with it. And they have this helpful therapy, which is called reparative therapy. And Stella was like, what? No, that doesn't happen. And you've argued against the bans.
Yeah, it does.
But
Actually, I've met some of those
happen.
people. It does happen.
Totally.
Yeah, it does.
So, so that whole gay, I think, especially maybe heterosexual people, they think like me, that went out with the arc, like that's gone, and it's not. It's actually a major deal.
It's not. And especially for young butch lesbian women, they're all telling each other that they're actually trans.
Yeah.
And one of the things, it just hurts my heart that there's so little lesbian community for the young women. And I don't know if it's that way for the guys or not. I'm not a guy, but lesbian community is just like almost non-existent in the U.S. There's just nowhere for these kids to go. And they don't really have lesbian groups. They have queer groups. Everybody's queer. And everybody's non-binary and everybody's trans and nobody's lesbian.
Well, what's really interesting is that it seems like the only people left standing who kind of preserve in air quotes the lesbian label are MTFs. So guys who identify as lesbian, so they're calling themselves lesbian. So any female child who's actually a lesbian is going to look around and be like, well, I definitely don't identify with that sexuality. So I'll be queer or I'll be non-binary or I'll be whatever, some other thing.
Yeah. And I regularly talk to moms. I do a lot of parent advocacy and I meet with parents quite frequently. And, when I first meet them and they'll tell me about their daughter, and I'll just ask them, do you think your daughter's a lesbian?
Yeah.
And they'll say, well, yeah, probably, but I don't know. And she goes to these things at school and they just, they're all trans and the parents are at a loss. They don't really know, how to help their daughters get through their young lives into a place where they reach adulthood happy with their sexual orientation. Yes, I'm a lesbian. It's beautiful. There's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
They end up in this trans world, and it's very sad.
One thing lovely
So I
about
think we're gonna have a huge wave of detransitioners in very, very soon.
Yeah. Well, I was just saying, one thing lovely about Themis Resource Fund is it's quite holistic. It's saying, yeah, we will fund your legal, but we are aware that, this is a serious process. So
Yes,
yeah, you support the
yes,
individual. And I know Beyond
yes,
Trans,
yes,
our therapeutic service for people who've been harmed by medical transition, is
mm,
there as
right.
well to kind of support
Yeah,
these people because it's a
yes,
harrowing
yeah.
process.
I would love to talk about that for a minute. Um, I am very concerned that detransition people do not become re-traumatized through the legal process. It is war, and it's nasty, and it's the outcome is uncertain to say the least. And it's more likely that you will lose than that you will win, and it can take years.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to go to depositions. You're going to get questioned. You're going to get they're very these attorneys are really hard on these people,
Mm-hmm.
um, in hearings and behind closed doors and depositions
Yeah.
and and we don't want these people re-traumatized. And I want them to get the justice that they deserve. And I think that lawsuits will change the whole face of what's happening in the U.S. But I don't want anyone to feel like, my case was used so someone else could benefit from it. They deserve they deserve dignity and justice for their own sake. And I think that sometimes their narratives are so compelling, and there can be a lot of reasons why people want their stories that sometimes don't serve them very well.
Yeah.
I
You
think the interest of trying to move forward the political and I guess bureaucratic complications with gender does not always fit in neatly with like an individual healing from their own process. I mean,
That's right.
sometimes these are
That's right.
very mutually exclusive, and I really feel for anybody who's gone through detransition. Like, if you do believe that this is something you feel a conviction to do, it's probably going to be very challenging because I mean
Yes,
that's the
it
case with
is.
all kinds of getting involved with courts or
Mm-hmm.
lawsuits, and the same has been
Mm-hmm.
true for all kinds of victims of all kinds of other crimes. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we know sexual assault victims have historically been like put on the stand and had their character defamed, and of
Yeah.
course that's a natural
Mm-hmm.
part of the legal process.
Mm-hmm.
Same
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
as you said with expert witnesses, for example. So this is
Yeah.
very hard.
Yeah. Yeah. They hear that all the time. Well, you did this to yourself.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
you signed the form. Well, you gave the consent. You got what you wanted.
Wow.
So they do blame them. Yeah,
Yeah,
they
of course.
absolutely do. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
it's really tragic. Yeah, yeah.
Are
So
there any other cases you
yeah, so we did a grant for Camille Kiefer, who's in Oregon, to get her case. Her case had been was kind of on the way to dying, and she had to get a new attorney and kind of get things restarted and do some medical review stuff. And so we helped her. We're able to help her with that. And then we have also done some funding for another case that hasn't been filed yet that I can't tell you about.
Okay.
Well
But
done.
I'm excited for that one. Yeah. It's another one of Mitra's. Yeah.
You're going to have to write a
Yeah.
book one day, Lynn.
Yeah. A lot of people have told me that, actually. I have kind of a weird
Not
life.
surprising. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Strange life.
but so far we've been able to grant everything that we have been asked for. And I'm really pleased about that. And we have funding, but we need more funding because
Yeah.
when one of these cases gets through, it's going to easily get to six figures.
Yeah.
So anybody who's listening to this, if you have $10, if you have $100, if you have $1,000, somebody gave us $2,000 a couple of weeks ago. It just made my heart sing, and then somebody sent me $20 yesterday, and that made my heart sing.
Yeah.
And she said, it's not much, but please use it wherever you can.
It's so
And,
lovely.
I mean, I hate to kind of plead for money, but we do need donations. And if you go to our website, there's a Stripe, a place where you can donate with a credit card, or you can use PayPal. But we need donations, and we are a 501c3 registered charity in the U.S. So all donations are completely tax deductible. And we're very grateful for all of them. And we have almost zero overhead.
That's great.
We don't have any paid employees. I have to pay people to work on my website every once in a while, that kind of thing. But it all goes to legal funding.
Yeah.
So,
amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Lynn, we are so glad to have spoken to you. We'd love to ask you, just having gone through the journey you've gone through, like, what have been some surprising things you've learned? And we'll take that into our extended conversation. But before we wrap it up here, related to gender or not, do you have any interesting books, podcasts, TV shows, films, anything that you've been watching or reading lately that you can recommend to our audience?
I can't. I was expecting that question. I can't think of anything.
Go on, you can. I think you recommend nature is where you're at, isn't
Nature. Oh,
More
my
whale
goodness.
petting,
it?
maybe.
Yeah.
Whale petting. Get
Bird
out in nature.
watching.
Go outside. Before I went whale watching. This maybe a year before, and somebody invited me to go camping, and I was kind of like, yeah, whatever. And actually, it was a campground that we had taken our children to a lot. So I was actually a little afraid that I'd have bad memories there, because I used to have a really hard time if I was in a place that would bring back memories. And I got up in the morning and I put my chair in the middle of the river, and I just sat there and listened to the water and the birds singing. And I thought, wow, the world is still here.
Yeah.
And it was like I was
amazing.
shut up in a little dark box and never came out. And then I got outside and I was like, there's still beautiful things. And then I thought, I'm 60 years old and I'm not going to live forever. And do I want to think about this the rest of my life? No, I deserve to live a life, and I can be happy regardless of the decisions that my children made that are still very sad. And, I don't think the grief ever really goes away, but at the same time, I can decide that it's not everything my life is made of,
Yeah.
That's
and
beautiful.
that was the decision that was really pivotal for me.
Well, I think that's an amazing, better than a book recommendation. That's an amazing way to leave off the interview.
It really is.
Thank you so much, Lynn.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks for joining us this week on Gender, A Wider Lens.
If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
And be sure to visit us on Substack by going to widerlenspod.com. There you can join our listener community, access bonus content and resources, plus learn about additional ways to support the show.
Our discussions are for educational purposes and are not intended as a substitute for mental health services.